turning to our panel, and I'm going to just say these as quickly as I can because there's so much that we're hoping to get through. Maria Tomlinson is a lecturer in public communication and gender at the University of Sheffield, and someone has asked, how do we break down the barriers that people find embarrassing around the subjects of menopause and menstruation? So very similar. Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've already had lots of fantastic conversations today about the importance of kind of talking openly and inclusively about the topic. But there's loads of amazing practical things that workplaces can do. And some of these are included in the standard as well. We talked about menopause champions or menstrual health champions. Also organising kind of informal networks where women and people can share their experiences of menstruation and menopause. Thank you so much. And just talking about this subject is so important. I mean, the research I'm doing at the moment about the menstrual movement and its impact on young people has shown that open conversations about menstruation on social media are making a difference. So some of the young people I spoke to in schools said that they read about periods on social media. And some of the girls said that, thanks to seeing influencers or organisations talk about periods, they were now starting to speak deliberately about periods in front of boys to normalise it. And some of the boys that I spoke to said that they saw periods mentioned on social media as well, and they were starting to understand the importance of normalising open discussion about menstruation. I even had boys saying to me, unprompted, let's normalise open talk about menstruation, let's reduce the shame around periods. So making sure that boys and men are part of this conversation as well is really important, and I think that's something that the menstrual movement can continue to focus on. I think it'll make a really big difference, but men are really important allies.
Thank you so much. And Sarah Williams, Equality Standards Consultant at Equality Counts. And you very much wanted to, you had something to contribute to that conversation, didn't you? The question I had was, how can we ensure women's health and well-being needs are integrated in mainstream standards and don't require special or niche standards?
So I think this question refers to the other standards that are out there with BSI and with specific regard to their overarching wellbeing standard. So I can understand why people are fearful or overwhelmed of yet another set of guidelines to think about and include in their work. And yes, managers are, totally overwhelmed with different action plans. They need to be mental health experts, wellbeing experts, endo experts, fertility experts. But that's just not practical. But what we have here is kind of an overarching wellbeing standard, and then underneath that, this is my understanding with the BSI, that there will be kind of different elements of guidance that relates to, whether it's neurodivergence or mental health at work, fertility. And those, our menstrual health and menopause guidance is 40-something pages long. So, you can't have one document that's 550 pages, and, nobody's going to look at it. But within that overarching guidance, it can refer you then to, the specific information that relates to the subject. So you can get your technical information from this new standard, as well as the kind of soft skills information as well.
Thank you so much. Sorry, so these first questions are very much about the still taboo topics of menstruation and menopause. So Helen Tomlinson, just going to you, what are the most effective ways of breaking through taboos around menstruation and menopause in the workplace? And then secondly, how can we ensure these aren't held against people experiencing symptoms and therefore disadvantage them in career progression?
So I could probably answer that around the practical steps that we've taken as an organisation in order to start the conversation. And I'll go back to the fact that in 2021 we launched our own menopause policy, and very naively and in hindsight I thought, great, job done, we've got a menopause policy, brilliant. But actually all that served to do was, it was the catalyst that started the conversation that changed the culture of the organisation. So actually we created podcasts, we did podcasts with senior leaders who were prepared to talk about their menopause symptoms. As you probably know already, I spoke about my heavy periods during my perimenopause. Another of my colleagues who's in a really senior position in the organisation spoke about her brain fog, her loss of confidence, her feeling that actually she needed to step down as the senior vice president because she could no longer do that role. So what that started to do was open up the conversation within the organisation that other people thought, well, actually, if they can talk about it openly, so can I. Or if they're, experiencing these things, it's okay for me to talk about it as well. So we did that. We launched the policy. We did management training, but every week we have, we call it an inclusion brunch, and basically it's 45 minutes. Anybody in the organisation can dial in, and our 4 different forums as part of our ED&I committee take it in turns to chair those or launch the topic of those brunches. So what they do is they share lived experience, they educate, and they celebrate if it's a topic that we would want to celebrate. And we launched menopause through that. So we'd already launched our policy. But I couldn't take over every inclusion brunch every week, which obviously I would have loved to have done, on the topic of menopause. So then we set up a network, which is an allyship programme, and then we set up we call it Tag Talk, the Adecco group talk, and it's a group of people who are willing to talk to people about what the challenges that they are facing and share their lived experience to help normalise what people are going through. And that has fundamentally changed the culture of the organisation. So, and we know that from we survey our colleagues 3 times a year through PCON, and our ED&I, our well-being and our feeling of belonging has gone up over the last 2 years a lot. Sorry, I've got a bit of brain fog there. I couldn't remember the words. Let's use a lot. But we've used that same process to launch a number of really challenging topics. And it's all started with lived experience. And I had a breakfast meeting with Alicia from Bloody Good Period this morning, who's in the audience. And she, it feels like a long time ago since breakfast time, but she mentioned a phrase which was experts by experience. And I think that is a really powerful phrase, and I will be using that moving forward. But that's how we launch those topics, to normalise them and have some really senior people being bold enough to start those conversations. And that's how, in my experience, we have prevented people from feeling like it is a taboo and it's been being used against them. We are desperate to keep female talent in our organisation at all levels, whether that's senior leadership or through to our frontline staff. And I imagine that many other organisations are no different. So normalising it and reducing the taboo is such an important part of this process and strategy.
Thank you so much. And now going to Pamela Windle, Women's Health Coach and Menopause in the Workplace Specialist at Smarter Change. One of the hardest things for women is to prove their menopause symptoms when many are not visible, such as psychological symptoms or flooding, for example. What advice do you have for women to get over this hurdle?
I think, if an organisation has a healthy relationship with their staff, she shouldn't really have to prove anything at all. No, it should be given that whatever she's struggling with at work, that the line manager or senior leader actually just accepts that. But, if it's an ongoing condition, like heavy bleeding, for example, maybe she needs to have a letter from her GP if that makes her feel better. But the standard in itself just allows organisation, if that's the information in there is embedded within the organisation, that will then, we won't have that conversation. She won't actually have to prove anything, and she can remain in work.
Thank you very much. And Darron Dupre, Head of Local Government, UNISON, Cymru, Wales. How do we best involve men in the conversation, especially when working in a company that's predominantly male?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, and one, thank goodness, I won't be accused of mansplaining about. sets the tone. Well, what's really what's really sort of important about involving men in the entire conversation, it's not just that we are the other half of the 50% or the 49%, but when I look around public services, lots of employers around, not just in Wales, where I'm from, but across the UK, you see male managers, disproportionately male managers everywhere. And part of my menopause journey, which I won't bore you with now, but part of the things which I have picked up along the way has been how difficult it is for women to have that courageous first conversation with their line manager. And I know that many women I've spoken to find that very first courageous conversation difficult with a female line manager, and even more difficult with a male line manager. So one of the approaches that we did at Flindra University NHS Trust, which is a big cancer hospital trust in Cardiff, was how we can engage specifically with men in the conversation around supporting their education, knowing that all the statistics were telling us that women themselves were saying that they were as prepared for menopause as they were for periods. So how much more difficult is it to expect men and male line managers to understand at all? So we had I would say it's a cheeky approach, whereby we included men in menopause training, not telling them that it was compulsory. And that was the background. And I heard just a couple of weeks ago that there was a big conference in London, whereby there was a big section was to talk about menopause, and a whole shed load of men in shirts and suits just walked out, shameful, in my view. But this is why it's so important to get men in. And I just, in terms of answering this question about how I can distill my menopause journey in terms of answering the question into 6 words: show up, stand up, and keep up. And the show up is if you get an opportunity to be able to go on some training, whether it's compulsory or not, and are engaged in it, do it, because it's the right thing to do. And of course, you become a better husband, brother, partner, uncle, human being. So, yep, show up, stand up, be an ally, and keep it up, which is the bane of a lot of the work that I do is going with employers, and you get the certificate on the back, mental health champion, and we've got the latest well-being and welfare certificate that they've got on the wall, and it stays on the wall alongside the menopause policy, which stays and gets dusty. Actually, the keep it up and the keep going is about delivering outcomes. Mm-hmm. Policies are great, but they're outputs. Delivering change, cultural change, and everything else within the workplace is outcomes, and that's the space we want to be.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Sarah, going back to you, every menopause is different. We're sort of focusing more on policy and change here. Every menopause is different. What kind of training do you foresee that organisations might implement, and are there specific topics that you'd recommend?
Thank you. Yes, and I think I can't sit here and not talk about diversity and inclusion in the menopause conversation. And this is one area that really can help an organisation, its people and its managers, to understand the sort of the real difference and diversity of experience. So I've got some colleagues here today and people from the Menopause Inclusion Collective, and we're really passionate that organisations need to understand how the intersectionality and can impact somebody's experience of menopause, and this can show itself in the workplace as well. So we need to think about LGBTQ people from different backgrounds, cultural beliefs, people, global majority people. When we're talking about what you do at work and in your training offer, how do you know that your training provider has any awareness of diversity and inclusion issues? If you're an organisation that has quite a mixed demographic, you know, across its staff, and you bring somebody in who just talks about one experience, well, that might not be helping 50% of your staff. Of your people. So I think we need to be a little bit more choosy about the offer that you take up when you're having your training. I've worked with some great organisations. I know Lauren's passionate about inclusion. I've worked with like Sarah from Talking Menopause as well. They're hot on the inclusion agenda too. So I think just to give an example, there's no point putting in your resource pack, oh, we have, you know, an employee assistance programme, if your trans and non-binary members of staff can't get the right support and advice from that number, and global majority staff might not reach out to EAP programme because of issues around trust and healthcare. So training, just to summarise, a range of topics. I think you can keep, there's a technical element that managers need and soft skills as well, but they really do need to understand that this is about having a humanistic approach, a person-centred approach. They should have that already. In any one-to-one meeting, they should be curious about who they're speaking to. They should be you know, seeing that person for who they are, not what they think they are because of what they see, you know. So this is about, you know, management skills that you should be working on anyway, and you're just adapting them to this conversation. And yeah, you could have male only talking sessions if you wanted to. It's really important to include younger employees who do experience menopause, and even if it's not because of that small number of people that have like premature ovarian insufficiency, what about cancer? People who've experienced cancer and have hysterectomy for that. I have surgical menopause, I had PMDD. There are lots of younger people who have these experiences. So the menstruation topic and BGP work around awareness around that is really important. So we need to bring all of these elements in. We also need to talk about neurodivergence as well. We've got more and more women in my age group, and I got my diagnosis last month as an autistic woman. Whee! And I'm, you know, happy to say that. But, you know, what's menopause and what's neurodivergence? What's menopause and what's stress? What's menopause and a bereavement, or your kids leaving home, or your divorce, or your relationship? Menopause is kind of running underneath all of those life events and those important factors. So having training that really gets, you know, has these deeper conversations maybe, because you can get the technical information elsewhere. So that's my take on training.
Wow, thank you so much. And Helen, how important do you think it is for employers to recognise this workplace issue and follow the new BSI standard? Hopefully really important. Otherwise it's going to be super awkward. And sorry, what are your recommendations for writing a good company policy on menstruation and menopause?
Well, first of all, obviously, I think it's super important that employers use that. But no, it absolutely is. And the fact that I'm here today is because it is free to any employer, regardless of the size of their organisation, the size of their budget, and it will help to make it available, that support, to anybody in their organisation, regardless of sector, you know, job type, etc. So I think it's fundamentally important, and as I said earlier, I'm delighted that it includes, so it's right through the whole women's health life cycle in employment, and it includes menopause, menstrual health and menstruation. So yeah, absolutely. And I've totally forgotten the second part of the question, so if you could just remind me of that, sorry.
Sorry. What are your recommendations for writing a good company policy?
Okay, so I think the more succinct it is and the less headings there are, the easier it is for somebody to follow and to actually use it, because I think you alluded to earlier about a policy that just sits, at best, it is a PDF with some words on it. So unless it lives and breathes, and coming from a sales organisation, the less words there are in something, the more chance you've got of making making it live and breathe. So the key roles, the responsibilities, the support available, the guidance for employers, the guidance for colleagues, symptom checklists, suggested reasonable adjustments based on role and sector are really important. But I would go back to the fact that it is literally a document, and a document doesn't change the culture of an organisation. It is how you launch it and implement it that will have the lasting change in the organisation.
Thank you very much indeed. Pamela, a question we've had is, we already have a menopause safe space. However, what advice can you provide to get employers to listen to our needs instead of being focused on accreditations from external companies?
Yeah, it's a good, good question. So accreditation has its place, definitely. You know, it obviously sets standards, but, you know, if an organisation only has accreditation in supporting women in the workplace in terms of menopause, then really it's not worth anything. I believe that from an organisation point of view, the senior leader really needs to be committed to the change within the organisation and really own it as well. And when that happens, that's when you get the cultural changes that will enable women to remain in work, whether it is through menstruation or the menopause long term. And it needs to be coming from that angle, really.
Thank you very much indeed. And Maria, what are your top three practical tips on how to make the workplace environment a more supportive place in which to be doing your job?
Ooh, great question. So the first thing kind of reiterates what's been said before about creating a really kind of supportive and inclusive workplace environment where employees feel they can raise issues that are important to them and need to be addressed around menstruation and menopause. And the second one, practical guidance, I think, because I come from as a menstrual health scholar, the importance of having menstrual products and bins in all toilets, including having women's toilets, having men's toilets, and having gender-neutral toilets too. And this kind of goes back to the interesting conversation we were having earlier about how can these things benefit men, specifically I think cisgender men we were talking about. And there are cisgender men who go through prostate cancer treatment that need bins, and there are men that need bins in bathrooms for other reasons. So this is something that benefits the whole workplace environment. And as well, I think another tip as well would be to kind of raise awareness around specific kind of menstrual health conditions like endometriosis and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And again, I think conversations about mental health and menstrual health are going to benefit the whole workplace, because if you create a workplace in which you can talk openly about menstrual health and mental health and things like PMDD, that could also encourage people of any gender to talk about other menstrual health issues and help break stigma and taboos around that. I think that often kind of stigma taboos around mental health and people's bodies are kind of interlinked. So, you know, how can we create a workplace environment where we can feel confident and supported?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Darron, how can small businesses, small teams, and those who, and I think the lady over there was touching on this earlier, those who are working with many freelancers best provide support?
Well, if you're a freelance, I'd obviously suggest join a union. And if you're a journalist, join the NUJ. And if you're a freelance in any other organisation, there will be a union for you. I have to say that because there's no point me being here if I don't. I'm not shy to admit that I'm a trade union official and have seen the power of. I will come to the answer, I promise, but have seen the power of trade unions in a good way, working in partnership with organisations to deliver menopause support and awareness at work. And that's because we don't just come from it from the perspective of it's not a women's issue, which it isn't, but we come from it from the perspective this is a workplace justice issue. Just like freedom from misogyny, sexual harassment and everything else are not a women's issue, and neither is menopause support and awareness at work. And we've done like shed loads over the years. don't want to be controversial, well before Davina. And I'm saying that with a large amount of tongue-in-cheek. But there has been a long history of providing support. So in terms of sort of freelancers, that is not my expertise. But what I would say was that there was an answer to the question a little bit earlier. I know that, for example, many freelancers have a portfolio career, and as part of the conversation that we have in terms of reasonable adjustments, the ability to be able to work flexibly, the ability to have flexible deadlines, the ability to work from home and to have access to all of the things actually we're fighting for in workplaces, but actually can't quite get yet because of design and hoping to retrofit designs. So there is a little bit of a good news story, if I'm not going to get myself into any trouble, in terms of people who are freelancers and work from home. But in terms of small businesses, which again is not my expertise, thank you for that. But what I would say is that the benefit of BSI and the panel that we had, and I think we'd all agree on this, is that we were trying to think front and centre of all the organisations that we weren't particularly expert on, to ensure that they were sort of like covered. So I work for a public service trade union. We normally have large hospitals, councils, utilities, large companies, British Gas, Welsh Water and all of that. But we specifically try to be able to tailor this standard so that it would be attractive to small businesses, sometimes to sole owners who employed freelancers as well. And I think because people talked about a compromise earlier, and I want to ensure that compromise is glass half full, not half glass empty, to get to mix it up. Because actually, I think we all ended up being very, very proud of this document and how it could be picked up by an organisation without a HR department, without a training department, in fact, without a budget, and with the ability to be able to transform a workplace, not overnight, because we talked about the cultural aspect, but small businesses and small teams who are also able to be very, very close to their workforce could actually, in no sense of irony, be the best test bed for this standard.
Thank you very much indeed. You have no idea how many pages of questions I still have, but I'm also aware that we very, very much want to open up questions to you guys. So does anyone have any questions for... I knew this was going to happen. Lady in pink at the back.
Hi, I'm Sarah Clifford. I work for the Disclosure and Barring Service, which is an ALB of the arm's length body of the Home Office, and I'm the menopause sponsor. I just wondered, well, the whole panel, but particularly Helen, the issues around women's confidence and the talent pipeline. One of the big issues for us is 62% of our workforce are female, a big chunk of those are over 40. And what our colleagues are saying to me is their confidence, and I know because I've been there myself, confidence just gets completely knocked out of you. And so colleagues are just not going for promotion, or they're struggling even to stay in, they feel it's even to stay in the job they've got. So what are the practical things an employer can be doing to support those women and make sure their talent pipeline is as inclusive as possible in relation to both menstruation and menopause?
Absolutely, and I felt exactly how you just said then, for sure, and we see it all the time. And I think that safe space, that opening up the conversation, again, it comes back to the cultural piece that, the majority of women in senior roles that leave their job because of menopause, it's not because of the practical aspects of it, because generally they have the level of opportunity and flexibility to be able to manage those really practical aspects that probably somebody in a different job or a different sector wouldn't necessarily be able to do. So it comes down to that feeling of confidence, feeling of anxiety, not being on top of your game, etc. And and there's not a vast amount that an employer can practically do about that. The reasonable adjustments for it are relatively limited. So the ability to have the conversation and feel confident and comfortable having the conversation is actually probably the most important thing. So, you know, us doing a podcast and opening it up that way really helped to do that. And having those safe spaces and that kind of thing to be able to do that is really important. So the cultural piece will go a long way to allowing women to feel that they can be open about the experiences that they're having and feel comfortable going into a meeting saying, as I've already said, you know, I am perimenopausal. I may forget my words in this session, but I'm bringing my whole self to the meeting, which is really what we want to be able to do in the workplace. So it comes down to the openness and the conversation. And somebody touched earlier on sort of the changes in that culture. And what I've seen is both internally, commercially and with government being asked to do more and more of those line manager sessions, and a lot of them have been at the request to be male only. So I did one for DWP not that long ago, and what I've noticed in terms of the changes that when I was doing that kind of thing maybe 18 months ago, I wasn't getting the uptake that I am. So being able to support the conversation that I am now, as an example, when I did one internally 2 years ago, I had 2 men dial into it from 2 male managers, and one of them had dialed into the wrong call, but he was that embarrassed he didn't dial off. But I've seen a massive step change in that, and that again comes down to that opening up the conversation and feeling supported. We run programs called Elevating Women in Leadership, and a lot of it is about confidence, you know, opening up the conversation and that kind of thing. But if you haven't got that culture of open conversation in your organisation at every level, that's not going to land.
Thank you. And Sarah, sorry.
Yes, just to comment on that as well, I think from maybe a slightly more a different perspective is that as women, we've possibly had a lifetime of working in environments of gendered ableism, ageism and sexism, and maybe by the time if we are having an average menopause in our midlife, our confidence is knocked as well because we're not being heard. So there's an element of this as well, which is about inclusive leadership and people taking responsibility and accountability for their behaviours and the way that they contribute to the culture in the workplace. So, there is an element around confidence being impacted because of things like anxiety, but also it's about the actual culture in that workplace. And I think we can't overlook that and pretend it's not happening.
Thank you. And there was a gentleman over here who wanted to speak earlier, and actually I know the point he's going to make is very valid. I hope that's okay.
Afternoon. Firstly, I greatly applaud all the huge work that's been done by everyone. But a lot of what I hear is sort of top-down and structured office environments, line managers, and so on. I come from 40 years running construction companies and building sites, and what goes on there has no relationship to what's been talked about. The thousands of women who work in construction and thousands who would like to, but the attitude, the likes of Persimmon, they've probably done enough to tick a box in the health and safety checklist for menopause and menstrual health issues. But on the great majority of building sites, there's no line.
Could I?
No line manager. There's a foreman, and the attitude is probably, if you don't like the heat in the kitchen, get out of the kitchen, get on with it, deal with it.
Could I put that to the panel and see if they have any? Do any of you have any comments that could perhaps respond?
There's a bit more I'd like to say, but yes, please do.
Is that all right? I'm so sorry. I'm so constantly aware of time, which no one else has to be. Thank you, Pamela.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
I spoke to the gentleman earlier today in the break, and in answer to the other question that the lady asked at the back, I think as an organisation, whether it's top-down or whether it is the other way that you mentioned, fundamentally it's about also empowering women to take ownership of their health as well. And we've talked about nutrition. Nutrition is a vital part of this. And from an organisation point of view, when we go into organisations, we actually support those women to make those changes and also look broadly. It's not just the menopause. You know, what else is happening for that woman? You know, what are the health conditions, for example? You know, particularly like sleep was one of the questions we were going to talk about earlier. You know, has she got the building blocks to sleep? Estrogen is part of that, but then if she's struggling with heavy bleeding from fibroids or endometriosis, then iron is part of that building blocks. And then, you know, if she's got PCOS, then it's highly likely she's going to be potentially type 2 diabetic, and that could impact her sleep as well. So when we go into organisations and actually support women, really educate them about the lifestyles that they take, the mindset that they have around their health. You know, we've all been brainwashed thinking that health looks like this, when actually it doesn't. It's a very different thing for women's health in terms of if we support our hormones, then that's how, from a nutritional point of view and lifestyle, that's how we get the results. So from an organisation, whether it is they don't have line managers or they do, actually supporting women in the workplace, educating them is really key.
But none of that opportunity exists. They don't have, they're not able to do that. They're flattened, they're pushed away from dealing with those issues. And what happens on construction sites happens in the majority of small SMEs, workshops, clothing places, food industry. There is nothing there. They're not allowed to do anything.
I thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. Lady in the blue.
Oh, which? Sorry. To answer your question, the HSE are not as far ahead as the BSI, and until the HSE starts to adopt the BSI, then we're not going to get anywhere in construction. There are some small changes. I've been on construction sites where they will have a small room for breastfeeding for engineers who are breastfeeding, that type of thing, but that is proactive people that are doing that. But what's coming through because of the Health and Safety at Work Act, the Equality Act and the management regs, because reproductive health, gender health, identity has been ignored, and it's been allowed to be ignored, that's why we're here, it is changing, and soon organisations like the HSE will not be able to ignore it. It isn't getting there, but this first of its kind document will shame other organisations of why they're not protecting their workforces. I completely agree with you, but wanted to give you a bit of hope. Yes, they need fining. Now, how many organisations are fined for psychological stress? HSE threatened that they would, but they're not. But that is a hazard, the same as physical hazards. So, hope that it is changing. Thank you.
Stop you there, and thank you so very much. Thank you.